Sha'akudim Perek Beis. V'nei osam adad alfim shetziyanu le'eo b'chotem. Hema nechnasim b'peh. These 4 alfim that we spoke about before in the chotem, the nose, these are the ones that go into the peh. V'hema nasim sham daled haval. And there, they go into the peh and make 4 haval. Like we spoke about before, the four bechinas of the ors that come out of the peh, which are really two havalim and 2 diburim. And here we're just calling it havalim, even though they really mean two havalim and 2 diburim. That's also what the Binyamin Kohen says. V'nei daled pamim hevel hu b'gematria kemach. 4 times hevel is gematria kemach. Ke'edeh she'nayim she'besoch hapeh nitchanim osam adad hadad havalim v'nasim kemach v'nigmeres pulasam. Because it's through the teeth that are inside the mouth that these 4 havalim are grinded, so to speak, v'nasa kemach, v'nigmer pulasam, and when you take these 4 daled and you grind them and you make them into kemach, which is flour, and there the pu'ula is finished, meaning it's completely perfected type of thing, which is what we're trying to create here as the kilim, or to bring it to this final stage in the peh. Ba'ayak shebeinecha mashin izbar le'eo ki min ha'or uzen smoli hanichnas b'peh nasim men chitzoni sakli v'min ha'nekev chotem smoli nasa pnimi sakli. So we shouldn't bother you what it says up above. We said something that would apparently not make sense. That from the or uzen small hanichnas b'peh, the or from the left ear that goes into the peh, nasim men chitzoni sakli, the outside of the kli comes from those 9. And the inside of the kli comes from the nekev chotem small, from the left nostril. Ki afal pi, this is very difficult. The simple question is that we're going to see later on that afal pi she'or makif, we're going to see later on that the kli pnimi would apparently, the inside of the kli is apparently much greater than the outside of the kli. The outside of the kli just adds to an item's look or to its feel. It's not the actual essence of the kli, you would think, or the highest aspect of it is the inside of the kli. The inside of the kli is what holds the item you're trying to hold. A bowl, for example, the outside could be painted or could be dirty. It doesn't make much of a difference. But the inside, if it's broken or if it doesn't work, that's the main part of the kli. So we see that the main aspect of the kli is the inside, and the inside has a lot more functionality and has a lot more importance than the outside. You could drive a car, and the car inside, the engine is broken, and the outside could look great, and it's a garbage car. And if you have an outside that looks like garbage, it's all scratched up and all ruined, and the inside works great, so then the car could be a $1 million or $1 million car. It could be a great car. Just for example, so here we see that we see that by kelim, by the vessels, by equipment, utensils, we see the inside is the most important, not the outside, as a general principle. And here we seem to say that the inside is created from the lower aspect, which is the aspect that comes out of the nose, whereas the outside of the kli is developed from the ears, comes from the oil that comes down from the ears. That would seem to be counter to what we understand to be fact, that the inside of the vessel is much more important than the outside of the vessel. Now he's going to explain this question at length and its answer. Now he's going to say, Afal pi sha'or ha'makif gadol b'mayla hu b'ula ma'od ma'pnimi. Now even though by or makif, again, it's very important to distinguish between these 2 aspects. The or makif and or pnimi, in relation to the kli chitzon and kli pnimi, the or makif is much greater than the or pnimi. So there we understand that he was going to explain that on the or makif is for sure greater than the kli, because we understand that the or, there are 2 types of or, and the or, we're going to see for certain reasons that the larger part of the or the more powerful type of or, stays on the outside and doesn't go in. It could be comparable to what a person doesn't yet understand, whereas the things that he does understand are much smaller. The things that he doesn't understand we can call that the or makif, something he's getting close to understanding. It's even higher than the things that he already did understand. That's something we can understand. So here the things on the outside by the or makif and or pnimi, the things on the outside are greater. Whereas by the kli pnimi, the vessel, the way a vessel works is the internal is more important than the external. The external is much less. So he's coming to distinguish, the Rav here is coming to distinguish between these two aspects. And he's coming to say that by the kli pnimi, I have a question. I don't understand why the kli pnimi is coming from a lower place, coming from the or chotem. And the kli chitzon is coming from the or ozen. Where I do understand by the or makif and or pnimi that the makif should come from the ozen yaminis, because the makif is a greater aspect. The makif is something that didn't yet come in, but it's something that's much, much greater than the thing itself. Whereas the or pnimi is something which already came into the vessel, like electricity, for example. If you were to call that or in relation to, as a mashal, obviously, in relation to a utensil like a fan. So when you plug the fan into electricity, so obviously electricity at the electricity station is much, much greater. The amount of electricity that could come into the fan through these wires are much, much greater than the amount that actually does. The amount that actually goes into the fan and runs the engine is a very small amount. Whereas the electricity or the energy that's outside of this fan and didn't yet go in, or on purpose doesn't go into the fan, is considered a much, much smaller aspect. So here too, by the or makif, it's exactly the same thing. The or makif is the light that didn't yet go in, or it could be that it's too much for it to go in, or other reasons. We're going to see exactly how it works. But this is contrary. This is very different. In contrast to the kli pnim and kli makif, kli pnim and kli chitzon, whereas the kli chitzon is much, much lower aspect than the kli pnim. So, even though by the makifim, by the or, the one that stands on the outside is much greater, and the one that's on the inside is much smaller. However, we see with our intelligence and with our physical senses, we can tell that the internal aspect of the kli is much greater. So why is it coming from a lower aspect of the oros? Why is it getting or only from the chotem and not from the ozen? Now this is different than the oros again, as we're going to explain. Why by oros, the one that's on the outside is much greater, and the one that's on the inside is much lower, whereas by the kelim we see it's the opposite. Ki ha'or hagadol shelo yuchol hakli lagvilo ulekavlo besofo yishar b'chutz besor or makif v'ormot yishar b'fnim mashen ken b'kelim. Now there's a lot of light that wants to go into the kli. Now there's only a certain amount that there's only a certain amount or a certain type of or that could be limited inside this kli. That's what actually goes into the kli. The aspect of the or that can't stays on the outside. Exactly, it's very similar to the mashal that I gave by the fan. The amount that's appropriate to go into the kli, the amount of light or energy, electricity that the fan could receive, is a much smaller amount than what it can't receive. The electricity that it can't receive, that's actually attached to even, is much, much greater than the light that it actually can receive only a couple watts or however it's measured, and the amount that it can't receive is that would like to go in or that would try to go in could be a lot more. So this is how it works by the or. That the or, the great light that the kli cannot hold, stays on the outside, and that's called or makif. However, the small amount of light that it actually can hold goes inside. And by the kelim, it's not like that. It doesn't have this type of principle. So how is it that from the ozen ha'elyon, the ozen, which is a much higher aspect, the chitzonis kli is created? Why is the chitzonis kli created from the higher aspect? I mean, the chotem shu yoser tachton yepnimis kli, and from the chotem, from the nostril, which is much the nose, which is much lower aspect, that creates the internal parts of the kelim. That's the question. The question is, again, just to recap, why is it that by the kli, the chotem creates the internal part, the chotem, which is a higher aspect. The ozon, which is a higher aspect, creates the external parts of the kli, and the chotem creates the internal parts of the kli. It should be the opposite. It should be that the chotem creates the internal part of the kli, which is the most important, and the ozon. It should be that the ozon, which is the higher or, should create the most important part of the kli, which is the pnimius hakli, and the chotem, which is the lower type of or, should create the chitzonis hakli, which is the less important aspect of the kli. By tshuva b'zeh, and the reason for this is, the answer is ki ha'or kulo ushava b'ashva echas. All the light is equal. And when it wants to be limited inside this kli, to come inside a vessel, the or that can't make it into the kli, that can't go into the kli, stays outside and stays as the higher aspect called b'chinas makif. And the or pnimi, which makes it inside the kli, or that succeeds to, or is appropriate to go into the kli, it goes into the kli and shines from the inside of the kli. Now the or that goes into the kli shines through the kli, through the walls of the kli, halfway through the walls, so to speak, halfway through the wall of the kli. And the or makif shines from the outside of the kli. And the or makif shines on the outside, stands on the outside and shines through the wall, through half of the wall of the outside part of the wall of the kli. And through these two oros, shining through the kli, the internal oros, shining through half of the inner half of the wall, and the oros makifim shining through the outer half of the wall. That is mezachich, that purifies the kli itself, that gives light to the kli. We need it to be that half of the vessel, half of the kli, will shine from or makif. However, the or makif is a very high type of light, and it would not go into such a low, go and penetrate through such a low kli. There's too much of a difference between the super high light of the or makif, which we said is the higher aspect of the light, and the kli. The kli is a totally different, much lower aspect in relation to the light. But the external, the or makif, we said, has to be, we need it to go through half of the outside part of the kli. Because there's a very, very big difference between them. And that's why, since the or makif is so different than a kli, the or makif, the kli, we're going to say, has to be a lot purer in order to receive the or makif. Otherwise, the or makif just won't go through. Therefore, we have to make it that Hashem made it that the pnimis hakli hagurua yishtavim or pnimis hagurua that the internal aspect of the vessel will match up appropriately with the internal lights, which means that it doesn't have to be so pure. The internal half of the kli doesn't have to be so pure in order to receive the internal lights, because the internal lights, the or pnimim, are much lower than or makifim. However, the outside of the kli has to be much more perfected in order to accept the or makif, which is much higher. This is a shimlokin. Because if the outside aspect of the oros were not much greater than the internal aspect, then the outside would not be able to, the external part, the kli chitzon, would not be able to receive the or makif, since the or makif is so much greater than the kli in general. So here we see that the kli chitzon has to be much more perfected than the kli pnimi, since the kli chitzon has to be able to receive the or makif, and the kli pnimi only has to be able to receive the or pnimi. And since the or pnimi is much lower, the kli pnimi doesn't have to be as purified as the kli makif, as a kli chitzon, it has to be much more purified to receive the or makif. There's another reason to explain why the kli chitzon really is much greater than the kli pnimi, even though we see, like we said by the case of the car that has broken outside, but the inside works great, is for sure worth more than the one that has the inside which is broken and outside looks great in general. So even though it still does look like that, we still need the external aspect of the kli, the external half of the kli, to be created and to be formed from a much higher light, which we said the Otzros Chaim, in order that the external part of the light should be able to receive the or makif, which stands outside of it, and to have it go through the whole outer half of the kli. There's also another reason. The equivalent is very similar to the first one. The or makif has a desire to attach itself to the or pnimi. Therefore, if the outer half of the kli was not more purified, the or makif would not be able to pass through it if the outer half was not very purified. Very similar to what we said before, that in order to go through the outer half, it has to be purified. So this is why the kli chitzon comes from such a higher aspect, which is the Chaim. And then the or pnimi and or makif would not attach, would not combine, and the or pnimi would not be receiving from the or makif. However, since the outer chetzi chitzon shel hadofen, the outer wall of the kli is purified, as yesh yicholos ba'or makif. Since it's purified, it has the ability to go through, the or makif has the ability to go through the first half, the outer half of the kli. And then they can shine one to the next. The or makif can shine to the or pnimi. And even though the internal half, the kli pnimi of the wall is not purified, is not as pure as the outside wall half, it's not a problem. Because the or over meirbo al chetzi ovi apnimi afa pi she'eino zach. Now, here he's saying that the or can still go through half of the wall, even though it's not purified. Kabir is referring to the internal, or the Otzros Chaim that's breaking through, going through the first the first half of the wall, the inner half of the wall of the kli. Even though it's not as zach as the outside half of the wall, it can still go through. So basically, we said two explanations, just to summarize. We said the reason for the question, why is it that the kli chitzon is made from such a higher aspect, from the Otzros Chaim, which is higher, and the kli pnimi is made from a lower aspect, from the Otzros Chaim. We would seem to see that the kli pnimi in general should be much higher. And the answer is, the first answer we gave is that the or makif has to shine through the outer half of the wall in order to shine to the kli, and therefore the outer half of the wall has to be much more mezuvach. We want to purify the whole kli. The outer half, or makif, will shine to the outer half of the wall, and the or pnimi will shine to the inner side of the wall, and therefore the outer side of the wall has to be more mezuvach in order to be able to receive the outer aspect of the light. So the second answer we said is that we want to unite we want the or pnimi to be able to receive from the or makif, and the only way this can happen is if the or makif can break through, so to speak, the first half of the kli. In order for that to happen, again, for the same reason we said before, the kli chitzon has to be more mezuvach, has to be more purified. Okay, don't ask and say, ki adayin yesh lahakshos, we could still ask, velomar, we could still say what we see, physically we can see that the internal half of the vessel of the kli is still greater, like we said, by the mashal of the car, which is a very clear thing for everyone to see, that the internal part of the kli is more important than the external part. And the answer for this is kach. Kine afal pi she'or pnimi katan me'or, even though the or pnimi is much smaller than or makif, and kozel liyoso mugbal to hakli, lachen hakli mekabel har shnei memeno. Since it's inside and bounded inside the kli receives a full hara, full radiance from the or pnimi. Aval or makif afal pishu or gadol. However, by the or makif, even though it's a great light, in kolzek kivan she'ino davakum tzimtzum makli, since it's not bound and compressed, held in by the kli, eino meir kol kach or b'chitzonis hakli. It doesn't shine so much to the chitzonis hakli. Afal pishu or gadol, even though it's a great light. In kolzek kivan she'ino davakum tzimtzum makli, eino meir kol kach or b'chitzonis hakli, kamo shemeir. So here we could still ask, saying, just to summarize, how is it that we still see that the internal part of a vessel is much more important, of a utensil or a kli is much more important than the outside part? The answer is that the internal parts is holding the or pnimi. And since it's holding the or pnimi, it's contained inside. And since it's contained inside, the light comes out with more force or with more strength into the internal parts of the kli. And therefore the internal parts of the kli receive a full har, a full shining, a full dosage of its light. However, the outside parts, which are not, the outside parts, the or makif, which is not limited inside the kli, which is not held and bound inside the kli, doesn't shine fully to the outside half of the kli. Even though it does penetrate it, doesn't shine it fully. You could give it a mashal, just a mashal could be, if you take a canister, maybe a can of the canisters that they have here in Israel, at least, of gas. So if you were to fill up a metal canister, pack it up with gas under high pressure, and you were to put it into a good smelling room, and this gas, let's say it smelled bad, it smelled like gas, and you would let it sit in a room that smelled very good like perfume for a long time, and you were to take it out. If you were to, after a few days, you would take out, let out all the gas, smell the outside of the clean, smell the inside. The inside would smell a lot stronger of gas since it was under a lot of pressure. It was limited inside this metal canister, whereas the perfumed room, where the air was all around this canister of gas, it didn't actually receive. It didn't go into the walls of the canister as strongly, with as much force as the gas did. So the gas would leave a lot stronger imprint, would break through a lot more of the wall, so to speak, and to go penetrate deeper into the metal with this smell of gas as in comparison to the perfume, which wouldn't penetrate so much. So this is why we see that the internal parts of the vessels, like the internal parts of the car or a computer, is obviously more important than the way it looks on the outside. The casing is a lot less, because the internal lights are being contained under pressure, or being contained inside the internal aspect of the internal parts of the kli, whereas the external part of the kli is not containing the ors makifim, even though the ors makifim are mashayim. This is what makes such a difference by what we see. How we see that the internal parts of the kelim are so much greater than the external parts.